The gunshot's thunderous report echoed across the dusty plains of New Mexico territory as Meredith Blackburn watched in horror from her cabin porch. A lone rider, slumped precariously in his saddle, struggled to stay mounted as his horse meandered toward her homestead in the fading light of dusk. The year was 1878, and Trinity, a small settlement nestled in the shadow of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, had seen its share of violence, but never had trouble come so directly to Meredith's doorstep. "Hold on, mister," she called out, gathering her skirts and rushing down the porch steps. The stranger's horse, a magnificent chestnut mare with a white blaze, stopped at the sound of her voice as if relieved to have reached help at last. The man, a tall figure dressed in trail-worn denim and leather, lifted his head slightly. Blood seeped through his fingers where they pressed against his side. "Madam," he managed before pitching forward, sliding from the saddle into the dust. Meredith reached him just as he hit the ground, her heart racing with fear and something else, a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in the 2 years since her father's passing had left her alone on their small ranch. At 24, she had learned to be self-sufficient, but the sight of this wounded stranger awakened the nurturing instincts her father had always said she inherited from her mother. "You'll be all right," she said, though she wasn't certain if he could hear her. She examined him quickly, a man in his late 20s, strong-featured with dark hair, and several days' worth of stubble on his jaw. The wound in his side looked serious but not immediately fatal. Calling upon strength she didn't know she possessed, Meredith managed to drag him toward the cabin. By the time she had him laid out on her bed, his eyes fluttered open again, startlingly blue against his sun-bronzed skin. "Names? Kingston," he whispered hoarsely. "Kingston Granger." "I'm Meredith Blackburn," she replied, cutting away his bloodied shirt with her sewing scissors. "And you, Mr. Granger, have managed to get yourself shot rather badly." A faint smile touched his lips before pain contorted his features. "Call me King," he said through gritted teeth. "Everyone does." "Well, King," Meredith said, reaching for the bottle of whiskey she kept for medicinal purposes, "this is going to hurt something terrible." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Wouldn't be the first time." Meredith worked with steady hands, cleansing the wound where a bullet had carved a deep furrow along his ribs. It could have been worse, an inch to the left, and it would have punctured his lung. Whoever had shot him had been either a poor marksman or intentionally aiming to wound rather than kill. "Bounty hunters," he murmured as if reading her thoughts. "3 of them followed me from Santa Fe." Meredith's hands stilled. "You're wanted." Kingston shook his head weakly. "Not by the law, just by men who don't like that. I know what they did." She studied his face, looking for signs of deception, but found only pain and exhaustion. Her father had always told her she was a good judge of character, and something in Kingston's eyes spoke of honor, not criminality. "Rest now," she instructed, finishing the bandaging. "Questions can wait until morning." Kingston nodded gratefully, his eyes already closing as exhaustion claimed him. Meredith stood watching him for a long moment, wondering what she had gotten herself into by taking in this wounded stranger. The last thing she needed was trouble, but she couldn't have left him to die. Not when she had the means to help. With a sigh, she pulled a chair close to the bed and settled in for a long night of watching over her unexpected patient. Outside, the wind whispered through the cottonwoods, carrying the scent of sage and promising rain. In the distance, a coyote called to the rising moon, its lonely cry mirroring the isolation Meredith had felt since becoming the sole occupant of her father's ranch. Until now. Dawn broke over Trinity with a painter's flourish of gold and crimson. Meredith, who had dozed in the chair beside her patient, woke to find Kingston watching her through fever-bright eyes. "You stayed," he said, his voice stronger than it had been the night before, but still rough with pain. "It's my house," she replied, rising to stretch her cramped muscles. "Where else would I be?" A hint of a smile touched his lips before fading. "Most folks wouldn't take kindly to a stranger bleeding in their bed." "I'm not most folks," Meredith said, approaching to check his bandage. Heat radiated from his skin, concerning her. "You've got a fever. That's to be expected with a wound like this, but we'll need to watch it carefully." Kingston nodded, then winced at the movement. "I'm sorry to be such a burden, Miss Blackburn." "Meredith," she corrected. "And you're only a burden if you die in my bed, Mr. Granger, so I'd appreciate it if you'd focus on staying alive." This earned a genuine chuckle that quickly transformed into a grimace. "Yes, madam." Meredith prepared a simple breakfast of cornmeal mush and strong coffee, helping Kingston to sit up enough to eat. As she tended to him, she couldn't help but notice the numerous scars that marked his torso, evidence of a hard life lived on the frontier. "You've been in trouble before," she observed, not a question. Kingston met her gaze steadily. "Life out here isn't kind to men who stand up for what's right. And that's what you do. Stand up for what's right." He looked away, his expression clouding. "I try. Sometimes trying gets you shot." Meredith couldn't argue with that logic. Her father, a former Union soldier turned rancher, had taught her that principles often came at a price. It was why they had struggled on this small holding while others, less scrupulous, had prospered. "Those men who were after you," she said carefully, "will they come looking?" Kingston's jaw tightened. "Possibly. I thought I'd lost them before I got to Trinity, but they're persistent. It's why I should move on as soon as I'm able." "You're not going anywhere for at least a week," Meredith said firmly. "That wound needs time to heal, and you've lost too much blood to be riding anywhere." "I won't put you in danger," he insisted. Meredith stood, hands on her hips. "Mr. Granger, I may be a woman living alone, but that doesn't mean I'm defenseless. My father made sure I could handle myself and a rifle if need be." Kingston studied her with new respect. "I don't doubt that, Miss Blackburn. But these men will have to get past me if they want to finish what they started," she interrupted. "And I'm a very good shot." The matter settled for the moment. Meredith went about her daily chores, keeping the rifle within reach as she tended the small garden and the few livestock that remained after her father's death. The ranch had been prosperous once, before drought and illness had taken most of their cattle. Now she managed with a milk cow, a few chickens, and whatever game she could hunt or trap. Throughout the day, she checked on Kingston regularly, changing his bandage and coaxing water and broth into him when his fever spiked. By evening, she was relieved to find his skin cooler, his eyes more focused. "You have a gentle touch," he commented as she applied a fresh poultice to his wound. Meredith smiled faintly. "My mother was a healer of sorts. She taught me before she passed." "I'm sorry for your loss," Kingston said softly. "It was a long time ago. I was only 12. She secured the bandage with practiced efficiency. "My father did his best after, though raising a daughter alone wasn't what he had planned for his life." "He did well," Kingston observed. "You're remarkable." Meredith felt a flush creep up her neck at the unexpected compliment. "I'm just doing what anyone would." "No," he said, his gaze holding hers intently. "You're not." The moment stretched between them, charged with something Meredith wasn't ready to acknowledge. She stood abruptly. "You should rest. I'll check on you again before I turn in." Outside, she leaned against the cabin wall, taking deep breaths of the evening air. It had been a long time since a man had looked at her the way Kingston just had, with admiration and something warmer. Most of the men in Trinity saw her as Joshua Blackburn's stubborn daughter, too independent and plain-spoken for proper courting. And she had been content with that assessment, finding satisfaction in her self-reliance. But Kingston Granger's blue eyes had stirred something she thought long dormant, and it unsettled her more than she cared to admit. The next few days fell into a rhythm. Meredith would rise early, complete her morning chores, then tend to Kingston. His strength returned gradually, the fever receding as the wound began to heal clean. They talked during her ministrations, careful conversations that skirted the edges of personal history, but revealed character through smaller details. Kingston had been a cowhand, then a trail boss, working cattle drives from Texas to Kansas before drifting into New Mexico territory. He spoke little of his family, but mentioned a younger sister living back east. He had a quiet way about him that belied the obvious strength in his lean frame, and a thoughtfulness that surprised Meredith. He wasn't like the rough cowboys who occasionally passed through Trinity, all bluster and bravado. On the fourth day, Kingston was able to sit up for longer periods, even moving to a chair by the window while Meredith changed the bedding. As she worked, she felt his eyes following her, and when she glanced up, he didn't look away. "I've been wondering," he said, "how a woman like you ended up alone on this ranch." Meredith smoothed the fresh quilt over the bed. "After my father died, there were offers to buy the place. Some thought I should sell and move to town, find a husband to look after me." Her tone made it clear what she thought of that suggestion. "But this land was everything to my father. He fought for it, bled for it. I couldn't just let it go." Kingston nodded, understanding in his gaze. "It's hard to walk away from something that's part of you." "Is that what happened with those men who shot you? You couldn't walk away from something?" His expression darkened. "Something like that." He shifted in the chair, wincing slightly. "I witnessed them murder an Apache family, a man, his wife, and their young son. The man had been helping the army as a scout, and these bounty hunters decided he was a traitor to his people. They used that as an excuse, but the truth was, they wanted the land his family had been granted by treaty." Meredith's hand flew to her mouth. "That's horrible." "It happens more than folks want to admit," Kingston said grimly. "I reported it to the authorities in Santa Fe, but these men have connections. They decided it would be simpler to eliminate the only witness. So you're on the run." "I was heading to Fort Union to speak with the commander there, a man I've heard is honest, but they caught up to me outside of Trinity." He met her gaze directly. "I'm sorry to have brought this to your door, Meredith." The use of her given name sent a small shiver through her that had nothing to do with fear. "You didn't choose to get shot," she said practically. "And I didn't choose to let you bleed to death when I could help." Kingston smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his serious face. "No, I don't suppose either of us had much choice in the matter." The moment was interrupted by the distant sound of hoofbeats. Meredith moved swiftly to the window, her body tensing at the sight of 3 riders approaching from the direction of town. "They've found me," Kingston said, pushing himself up from the chair with a grimace. "I need my gun." "You're in no condition to shoot anyone," Meredith said firmly, retrieving her father's Winchester from beside the door. "Stay inside, I'll handle this." Before Kingston could protest, she stepped onto the porch, rifle held casually but ready. The 3 men reined in at a respectful distance, taking in the sight of her with the weapon. "Afternoon, madam," called the leader, a wiry man with a pockmarked face and cold eyes. "We're looking for a fella who might have passed this way. Tall drink of water, dark hair, probably wounded." "Haven't seen anyone matching that description," Meredith replied evenly. "Not many travelers come by here." The man exchanged glances with his companions, a heavy-set brute with a bushy beard, and a younger man whose hand hovered near his holstered pistol. "Mind if we take a look around?" "His horse is similar to that one in your corral," the leader said, nodding toward Kingston's chestnut mare, which Meredith had been caring for alongside her own animals. "That's my horse," she lied smoothly. "And yes, I do mind. This is private property." The leader's expression hardened. "We have reason to believe you're harboring a dangerous man, Miss Blackburn, Meredith Blackburn, and the only dangerous men I see are the three in front of me." She raised the rifle slightly. "I suggest you turn around and head back to town before there's trouble." The younger man snorted. "You gonna shoot all three of us, lady?" "I only need to shoot one," Meredith replied coldly. "The question is, which of you wants to be first?" The standoff stretched for several tense seconds. Meredith knew she was taking a tremendous risk, but she also knew that showing any weakness to men like these would be fatal. Finally, the leader spat into the dust. "Come on, boys, let's check elsewhere. Could be he passed through without stopping." He fixed Meredith with a menacing stare. "We'll be watching, Miss Blackburn, if we find out you've been lying to us." "Good day, gentlemen," Meredith cut him off, keeping the rifle trained on them as they slowly turned their horses. Only when they had ridden well out of sight did she lower the weapon and return inside, her hands shaking with delayed reaction. Kingston was standing by the window, his face pale with pain and tension, his revolver in his hand. "That was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I've ever witnessed," he said, voice tight. "Probably both," Meredith admitted, setting the rifle aside. "But it worked, for now." Kingston sank back into the chair, visibly exhausted by even that small exertion. "They won't give up. Clyde Farrow, the leader, doesn't like being crossed, and now he's got you in his sights too." Meredith poured a glass of water and brought it to him. "Then we'll need a plan. How far is Fort Union from here?" "About 2 days' ride in good conditions." "And you're in no condition to ride at all," Meredith said, thinking aloud. "But those men will be back, and next time they won't be satisfied with words." Kingston took her hand, his grip surprisingly strong despite his weakness. "I won't let them hurt you, Meredith. I'll leave tonight, draw them away from here." "And die in the process," she retorted. "No, there has to be another way." She paced the small room, mind racing. "Could we send word to Fort Union? Ask for assistance?" Kingston shook his head. "It would take just as long for a messenger to reach there and return with help, and we'd need someone we could trust." Meredith stopped pacing, an idea forming. "What if we don't wait for them to come back? What if we make the first move?" Kingston raised an eyebrow. "What do you have in mind?" "Trinity has a Sheriff Samuel Porter. He's a friend of my father's, a good man. If we can get word to him about what these men have done, he might be able to help us." She thought further. "They'll be watching the road, but they don't know the land like I do. There's a back trail through the hills that leads to town. I could take it at first light." Kingston frowned. "It's too dangerous. If they catch you alone, they won't be looking for me to leave. They think you're hidden here and they'll be watching for you to make a run for it," Meredith argued. "Besides, I can move faster alone." The look in Kingston's eyes told her he wanted to protest further, but he recognized the determination in her stance. "You're not a woman who backs down easily, are you?" he asked softly. "Not when something matters," she replied, holding his gaze. A moment of understanding passed between them, acknowledgement of something deeper than the circumstances that had thrown them together. Kingston finally nodded. "All right, but promise me you'll be careful." "I promise," Meredith said, trying to ignore the warmth that spread through her at his concern. "Now you need to rest. Tomorrow may be a long day for both of us." As night fell, Meredith prepared for her morning journey, laying out clothing and packing a small bag with essentials. She checked and loaded her father's pistol, smaller and easier to conceal than the rifle, and tucked it into her skirt pocket. Kingston watched her preparations from the bed where she had insisted he return to conserve his strength. "You move like someone who's thought about running before," he observed quietly. Meredith paused, surprised by his perception. "After my father died, I considered it," she admitted. "Starting fresh somewhere else, away from the memories and the struggle of keeping this place going. But I couldn't bring myself to leave." "What held you here? Just your father's memory?" She sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly weary. "Partly that, but also hope, I suppose. Hope that things would get better, that the land would recover, that I would find a purpose in staying." She smiled ruefully. "Foolish, perhaps." Kingston reached out, his fingers brushing her hand. "Not foolish, brave." His touch lingered, warm and reassuring. Few people have the courage to hold on to hope when everything seems set against them. Meredith looked down at their hands, so close to intertwining. It would be easy to give in to the comfort he offered, the connection that had been growing between them despite the danger and uncertainty. Instead, she stood, needing distance from the emotions his presence stirred. "We should both get some sleep. Dawn comes early." Kingston nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Meredith," he called softly as she turned to leave. "Thank you, not just for saving my life, but for risking yours to help me now." She paused at the doorway. "We're not safe yet, Mr. Granger. Save your thanks for when this is over, King," he reminded her. "And I've learned that gratitude, like hope, shouldn't wait for perfect circumstances." Meredith smiled despite herself. "Good night, King." "Good night, Meredith." She closed the door quietly behind her, leaning against it for a moment, her heart beating too fast. In just a few days, this stranger had come to matter to her in ways she hadn't expected. It was dangerous not just because of the men hunting him, but because caring for someone meant the possibility of loss, something Meredith had experienced too often. With a deep breath, she straightened and moved to her makeshift bed on the small sofa in the front room. Tomorrow would require all her courage and focus. There would be time later to sort through these newfound feelings if they survived what was to come. The sky was just beginning to lighten when Meredith slipped from the cabin, dressed in her most practical riding skirt and boots. She had left water and food within Kingston's reach, along with his loaded revolver. Their whispered goodbye had been brief but laden with unspoken emotions. "Be back by nightfall," he had said, clasping her hand tightly. "If you're not, I'm coming after you, wound be damned." The intensity in his eyes had stolen her breath for a moment. "I'll be back," she had promised. "Just focus on getting stronger." Now, moving silently through the pre-dawn stillness, Meredith led her horse from the small barn, careful to avoid any noise that might alert watching eyes. The back trail she planned to take began at a dry creek bed behind her property, winding through scrubby hills before eventually reconnecting with the main road much closer to Trinity. She mounted quickly, scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. Seeing none, she guided her horse into the shallow ravine that would conceal their departure, keeping to a walk until they were well away from the cabin. The journey to Trinity took longer than the direct route would have, but Meredith arrived in town shortly after mid-morning without encountering anyone on the trail. The small settlement was just beginning its day in earnest, shopkeepers opening their doors and townsfolk going about their business. Meredith rode directly to the sheriff's office, a modest wooden structure adjacent to the town jail. She tied her horse to the hitching post and entered without hesitation, finding Sheriff Porter at his desk, nursing a cup of coffee while reviewing wanted posters. "Meredith Blackburn," he said, looking up with surprise. "Didn't expect to see you in town today." His weathered face creased with concern as he took in her determined expression. "Something wrong out at your place?" "You could say that, Sheriff," she replied, closing the door behind her. "I need your help, and it can't wait." Over the next half hour, Meredith explained everything: finding Kingston wounded, learning about the murdered Apache family and the visit from Pharaoh and his men. Sheriff Porter listened without interruption, his expression growing grimmer with each detail. "Clyde Pharaoh," he said when she finished. "I know the name. He's got a reputation as a man who gets what he wants one way or another." He leaned back in his chair, considering. "What you're describing, the murder of that Apache family, that's federal business, especially if they were under treaty protection." "Then you'll help us?" Meredith asked, hope rising. Porter nodded slowly. "I'll do what I can." Pharaoh and his boys were in the saloon last night, making noise about looking for a man who'd crossed them. I didn't pay much mind at the time, but now. He stood, reaching for his hat. "We need to get your friend Granger to Fort Union where he can make his statement to the authorities there. But first, we need to deal with Pharaoh." "How?" Meredith asked. "They're watching my property, waiting for Kingston to make a move. Then we'll give them something else to watch," Porter said grimly. "I'm going to deputize a few men I trust. We'll create a diversion that'll draw them away from your place, and in the meantime, you and Granger can slip out and head for Fort Union." Meredith frowned. "Kingston's in no condition to ride that far." "We'll use my wagon," Porter decided. "Cover him up, make it look like you're just bringing supplies back from town. Once you're clear of Trinity, I'll have a man waiting with fresh horses at the crossing. From there, it's a straight shot to Fort Union." The plan was risky, but better than waiting for Pharaoh to return with reinforcements. Meredith waited impatiently while Porter gathered the men he needed: 3 local ranchers with military experience and a vested interest in keeping the peace in Trinity. "Remember," Porter instructed as they prepared to set out, "Pharaoh's men are watching the main road. I'll take my deputies and flush them out, drive them north toward the bluffs. Once you hear shots fired, that's your signal to head out with the wagon. My man, Davis, will be waiting at Clearwater Crossing with the horses. Don't stop for anything until you reach Fort Union." Meredith climbed onto the wagon seat beside the sheriff, her heart pounding with anxiety and determination. The wagon was loaded with supplies she had ostensibly purchased in town: flour, coffee, and other staples, creating a believable reason for her return trip. As they approached her property, Porter slowed the wagon. "No sign of them," he murmured, "but they're out there." "You ready for this, Miss Blackburn?" Meredith nodded, grip tightening on the reins. "Let's get Kingston to safety." Porter gave her an appraising look. "You care about this man." It wasn't a question, and Meredith didn't bother denying it. "He's a good man who tried to do the right thing." "That's worth caring about." The sheriff's expression softened. "Your father would be proud of you, Meredith. He always said you had more backbone than most men he knew." The mention of her father brought a lump to her throat. "Thank you, Sheriff." They pulled up to the cabin, and Porter helped her unload the supplies, maintaining the pretense of a routine visit to town. Once inside, they found Kingston up and dressed, his revolver within reach as he sat by the window. "Sheriff Porter," Kingston said, standing carefully, his hand extended. "I appreciate your help." "Save your thanks till we've got you safely to Fort Union," Porter replied, shaking the offered hand. "You able to travel?" Kingston nodded, though Meredith could see the effort it cost him to appear stronger than he was. "Just point me toward a horse." "Wagon first," Porter corrected. "We need to get you clear of Pharaoh's men before you mount up." He explained the plan quickly, Kingston listening with focused attention. "It's a good plan," he agreed when Porter finished, "but risky for you and your men." "Part of the job," Porter said simply. "Now, we need to move fast. My deputies are already in position. Once they start the diversion, we won't have much time." Meredith gathered what they would need for the journey while Porter helped Kingston to the wagon, concealing him beneath canvas and supplies in the back. The effort clearly pained Kingston, but he made no complaint, his jaw set with determination. "Take care of her," he said to Porter as the sheriff prepared to leave. "I suspect she'll be the one taking care of you," Porter replied with a knowing look that made Meredith flush. "But yes, I'll make sure you both get through this." Porter mounted his horse and rode out, heading toward where his deputies waited to spring the trap on Pharaoh's men. Meredith sat beside the wagon, listening intently for the signal, her hand resting on the pistol in her pocket. Kingston's voice came softly from beneath the canvas. "Meredith," she moved closer, "I'm here if something goes wrong, if we get separated." "That's not going to happen," she interrupted firmly. "But if it does," he persisted, "I need you to know something." There was a pause filled with the weight of unspoken words. "These past days, despite everything, have been— I've never met anyone like you." Meredith's heart quickened. "King," the distant crack of gunfire cut her off the signal. "That's our cue," she said, scrambling onto the wagon seat. "Hold on." She flicked the reins, setting the horses in motion, steering the wagon away from the cabin and toward the main road. More gunshots echoed from the north, drawing attention away from their departure. Meredith kept the horses at a steady pace, not too fast to arouse suspicion, but quick enough to put distance between them and danger. They had almost reached the main road when the sound of hoofbeats approached from behind. Meredith glanced back to see the youngest of Pharaoh's men galloping toward them, his face twisted with recognition and triumph. "Keep going," Kingston called from the wagon bed, the canvas rustling as he reached for his revolver. Meredith urged the horses faster, but the rider was gaining. A shot cracked past her ear, splintering wood from the wagon seat. She ducked instinctively, then straightened, drawing her own pistol. Another shot rang out, this one from the wagon behind her, as Kingston fired through a gap in the canvas. The pursuer jerked in his saddle but kept coming. Meredith steered with one hand, raised the pistol with the other, and squeezed the trigger just as her father had taught her. The man clutched his shoulder, his horse swerving wildly, giving them precious seconds to increase their lead. They reached the main road and Meredith turned the team toward the crossing, pushing them to a gallop now that concealment was impossible. In the distance, more gunfire indicated that Porter and his deputies were engaged with the other bounty hunters. "Are you hit?" Kingston called anxiously. "No," Meredith replied, heart hammering. I'm fine. Keep going." The crossing lay 5 miles ahead, a ford over Clearwater Creek where the sheriff's man would be waiting with fresh horses. Meredith focused on the road, expecting pursuit at any moment, but none materialized. Porter's diversion appeared to be working. They reached Clearwater Crossing as the sun climbed toward noon. Davis, a lean cowhand who worked Porter's small ranch, waited with 3 saddled horses as promised. "Sheriff sent word you might have trouble on your tail," he said as Meredith pulled the wagon to a halt. "Anybody following?" "One tried," Meredith said, climbing down to help Kingston. "But we discouraged him." Kingston emerged from beneath the canvas, moving stiffly but with determination. His wound had begun bleeding again from the exertion and the jarring ride, a dark stain spreading on his shirt. "You need tending," Meredith said with concern. "Later," he replied, eyes scanning the horizon. "We need to keep moving." Davis helped transfer their few supplies to the horses and pointed them toward the trail that would take them most directly to Fort Union. "Sheriff said to tell you he'll meet you there once he's dealt with Pharaoh and his bunch." Meredith thanked him, then mounted her horse, watching anxiously as Kingston pulled himself into the saddle with careful movements. His face was pale beneath his tan, but his eyes were clear and focused. "Ready?" she asked. He nodded, managing a smile that warmed something deep inside her. "Ready." They rode steadily through the afternoon, keeping to less traveled trails where possible. Kingston's strength surprised Meredith, his determination evident in the set of his shoulders, and the way he refused to slow their pace despite his obvious discomfort. As dusk approached, they made camp in a sheltered hollow beside a small stream, far enough from the trail to avoid detection. Meredith insisted on checking Kingston's wound, finding it inflamed but not infected. "You're lucky," she said as she applied a fresh bandage. This could have opened completely with all the jostling. Kingston caught her hand as she finished. "Luck had nothing to do with it. I had the best nurse in the territory." Their eyes met in the fading light, and Meredith felt the same connection that had been growing between them since that first night, a recognition of something rare and precious. "Why did you help me?" he asked softly. "You could have sent me on my way, avoided all this danger." Meredith considered the question. "At first, it was simply the right thing to do. You were wounded and I could help." She looked down at their still joined hands. "But then I got to know you and Kingston prompted when she hesitated. "And I realized that some people are worth the risk," she finished, meeting his gaze again. Kingston's expression softened. "Meredith Blackburn, you are the most extraordinary woman I've ever met." His hand rose to cup her cheek gently. "When this is over, when we've dealt with Pharaoh and his men, I'd like to come back, if you'd allow it." The question in his eyes was unmistakable. Meredith covered his hand with hers, her heart full of emotions she had thought long forgotten. "I'd like that," she whispered. Their first kiss was tentative, a gentle exploration amid the wilderness and danger that surrounded them. When they drew apart, Meredith saw in Kingston's eyes the same wonder she felt, that somehow, in the midst of chaos, they had found something rare and beautiful. "We should rest," she said reluctantly. "Tomorrow will be another long day." Kingston nodded but didn't release her hand. "Stay close," he murmured. "For warmth," he added with a smile that made her pulse quicken. They slept side by side beneath the stars, wrapped in their blankets, the promise of something more hovering between them like the distant glow of dawn on the horizon. Morning came crisp and clear, and they set out early, hoping to reach Fort Union by midday. Kingston seemed stronger, moving with greater ease. The color returned to his face. They rode side by side when the trail permitted, their conversation flowing more freely now that the tension between them had eased. Kingston spoke of his family, parents long gone, a sister married to a banker in St. Louis, and his years working cattle drives before drifting into New Mexico. Meredith shared memories of her father, of learning to run the ranch alongside him, and her dreams of someday restoring it to prosperity. "It's good land," she said as they crested a rise that offered a view of the distant mountains. "With the right investment, the right care, it could flourish again." Kingston studied her profile, admiring the determination in her expression. "It would take hard work. And it wouldn't be easy for a woman alone." Meredith glanced at him, a challenge in her eyes. "Are you suggesting I need a man's help, Mr. Granger?" "Not at all," he replied with a smile. "I'm suggesting that some burdens are lighter when shared, and some dreams are sweeter." The implication hung between them, neither quite ready to give it voice but both acknowledging its presence. They continued riding, the connection between them deepening with each mile. As they approached Fort Union, the imposing adobe walls of the military installation came into view, the American flag flying above the parade ground visible from a distance. Relief washed over Meredith at the sight they had made it. But their sense of security was shattered by the thunder of hoofbeats behind them. Turning in their saddles, they saw 3 riders pursuing at a gallop Pharaoh and his remaining men. "Go," Kingston urged, pulling his revolver. "Get to the fort." "I'm not leaving you," Meredith protested, drawing her own weapon. "Together then," Kingston said, his expression fierce. Ride hard." They spurred their horses to a gallop, racing toward the fort's gates. Gunshots cracked behind them, bullets whizzing past. The sentries at the fort's entrance had spotted the commotion, rifles raised in warning. "United States Army," Kingston shouted as they approached. "We seek protection." The gates were opening, soldiers appearing with weapons at the ready. Meredith and Kingston thundered through, hearing shouts as the pursuing bounty hunters were ordered to halt. Inside the fort's walls, they reined in their lathered horses, turning to see Pharaoh and his men pull up short at the sight of a dozen army rifles pointed their way. A stern-faced officer approached, demanding an explanation. "Captain," Kingston said, straightening in his saddle despite his exhaustion, "my name is Kingston Granger. I've come to report a murder, and these men are the killers." The next hours passed in a flurry of activity. Kingston gave his statement to the fort's commander, Colonel Hayward, while army doctors tended his wound. Meredith provided her own account of the events at her ranch, her steady voice and clear recollection impressing the officers. Pharaoh and his men were detained pending investigation, their protests falling on deaf ears when a patrol was dispatched to the site. Kingston described and returned with confirmation of the Apache family's remains. Sheriff Porter arrived as evening fell, having tracked them to the fort after ensuring Trinity was secure. His testimony regarding Pharaoh's reputation and behavior added weight to the case against the bounty hunters. "You did well," Porter told Meredith as they sat outside the infirmary where Kingston was being treated. "Your father would be proud." "I hope so," she replied softly. "All I could think was that I couldn't let them get away with it, not the murder and not hurting Kingston." Porter studied her with knowing eyes. "He means something to you, doesn't he?" Meredith didn't bother denying it. "Yes, though it seems strange to say so after knowing him such a short time." "Sometimes that's how it happens," Porter said with unexpected gentleness. "Your mother and father met during the war, did you know that? He was wounded and she nursed him back to health. 3 weeks later they were married." Meredith stared at him in surprise. "I didn't know," Porter nodded. "Some connections don't need time to grow roots. They just are." The infirmary door opened and Kingston emerged, moving carefully but standing tall. His side was freshly bandaged, his face clean-shaven, making him look younger and somehow more vulnerable. "The doctor says I'll live," he announced with a wry smile. "Thanks to your excellent care, Miss Blackburn." Meredith rose, resisting the urge to go to him in front of Porter and the soldiers milling about the fort yard. "I'm glad to hear it, Mr. Granger." Porter stood as well, clapping Kingston lightly on his uninjured side. "Colonel Hayward tells me they'll be sending Pharaoh and his men to Santa Fe for trial. He wants you both to be ready to testify when the time comes." Kingston nodded. "Whatever it takes to see justice done." "In the meantime," Porter continued, "I reckon Miss Blackburn could use an escort back to her ranch. I'd do it myself, but I've got responsibilities in Trinity." The suggestion was transparent, but neither Meredith nor Kingston objected. After making arrangements to depart the following morning, they found themselves with a rare moment of privacy in the fort's small garden, where officers' wives had planted flowers to soften the harsh military environment. "So," Kingston said, taking Meredith's hand as they walked slowly among the blooms. "What happens now?" Meredith glanced at him. "You mean after we return to the ranch?" He nodded. "I meant what I said before, Meredith, when I asked if I could come back." He stopped, turning to face her fully. "These past days have been extraordinary, not just the danger and the escape, but getting to know you. I've never met anyone who made me feel the way you do." Meredith's heart quickened at the sincerity in his voice. "And how is that?" "Like I've found something I didn't even know I was looking for," he said simply. A woman of courage and kindness, strength and gentleness. His hand rose to touch her cheek. A woman I could love if she'd let me try. The word love hung between them, both too soon and somehow exactly right. Meredith leaned into his touch, years of solitude and self-reliance melting away in the warmth of his gaze. "It won't be easy," she cautioned. "The ranch is struggling, and there will be talk a single woman taking in a stranger." Kingston smiled. "I'm not afraid of hard work or talk." His expression grew more serious. "Unless you'd rather I didn't stay. If this has all been too much, too fast." Meredith silenced him with a kiss, her arms sliding carefully around his waist, mindful of his wound. "Stay," she whispered against his lips. "Help me rebuild what my father started. Help me make something new." His arms tightened around her, his kiss deepening with a promise of all that could be between them. When they finally drew apart, both a little breathless, Kingston rested his forehead against hers. "I think I started falling for you the moment you dragged me off that horse," he confessed with a soft laugh. "Even half-conscious, I could see the fire in you. And I thought you were the most trouble I'd ever brought to my doorstep," Meredith replied, smiling. "I just didn't know what kind of trouble." "The permanent kind, I hope," Kingston murmured, kissing her again. They returned to Trinity 2 days later, Kingston riding tall despite his still healing wound, Meredith beside him with a new lightness in her heart. The news of their adventure had preceded them, embellished with each telling until the townsfolk regarded them with a mixture of awe and curiosity as they rode through on their way to the Blackburn ranch. Kingston settled into life at the ranch as naturally as if he had always belonged there. His knowledge of cattle and land management complemented Meredith's skills, and together they began the slow work of restoration. With the bounty hunters in custody awaiting trial, they were free to focus on building a future. Word reached them a month later that Farrow and his men had been convicted of the murders and would hang for their crimes. The news brought closure, allowing Kingston and Meredith to put the danger behind them and look forward. On a golden evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the distant mountains, Kingston took Meredith's hand. "I've been thinking," he said, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. "About us, about the future." Meredith turned to look at him, love warming her gaze. "What about it?" Kingston reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold band. "I was in town yesterday, had this made by the silversmith." He held it up, the last rays of sun catching the metal. "I know it hasn't been long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life, Meredith Blackburn. I love you, and I want to spend every day showing you how much." Tears filled Meredith's eyes as Kingston slid from the chair to kneel before her. "Will you marry me?" he asked, his voice husky with emotion. "Will you be my wife, my partner in everything?" Meredith's answer was in her kiss, fierce and tender all at once. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "Yes to all of it." They were married 2 weeks later in Trinity's small church, Sheriff Porter standing as witness along with the few close friends Meredith had in town. The ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful, both bride and groom radiating happiness as they spoke their vows. "I take you, Kingston Granger, to be my husband," Meredith said, her voice steady and clear. "To stand beside you in all things, to share in joy and sorrow, plenty and want, from this day forward until death parts us." "I take you, Meredith Blackburn, to be my wife," Kingston responded, his eyes never leaving hers. "To honor and cherish, to protect and support, to love faithfully all the days of my life." Their life together unfolded with the changing seasons. The ranch began to prosper under their joint care, new cattle purchased with Kingston's savings and Meredith's careful management. They added a room to the cabin, then another, transforming it into a proper home as their family grew. Their first child, a son they named Joshua after Meredith's father, arrived just over a year after their wedding. He had Kingston's blue eyes and Meredith's determined spirit, crawling early and walking before his first birthday. "He's going to be trouble," Kingston predicted fondly, watching their son toddle after a chicken in the yard. "Like his father," Meredith replied with a smile, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her second pregnancy. As the years passed, the Blackburn Granger Ranch became known throughout the territory for its fine cattle and the warm hospitality of its owners. Their family expanded to include a daughter, Eleanor, named for Kingston's mother, and eventually a third child, another boy they called Samuel, in honor of Sheriff Porter who had helped bring them together. Trinity grew alongside them, the railroad finally reaching the town and bringing new opportunities and settlers. Kingston served on the town council, his integrity and fairness earning him respect throughout the community. Meredith established a small clinic, using the healing knowledge passed down from her mother to help those in need. On their 10th anniversary, Kingston presented Meredith with a leather-bound journal. "What's this?" she asked, running her fingers over the embossed cover. "Our story," he said, opening it to reveal his neat handwriting. "From the day you found me half dead on your doorstep to today, I thought our children might like to know someday how their parents found each other." Meredith's eyes filled with tears as she read the first page. "The day Meredith Blackburn saved my life was the day my real life began. With her hands, she healed my body. With her heart, she healed my soul." She looked up at the man who had changed everything for her, still handsome, despite the strands of silver at his temples, his eyes still as blue and honest as the day she'd first looked into them. "I love you, Kingston Granger," she said softly, "more with each passing day." His smile, that same smile that had first warmed her heart in the midst of danger, lit his face. "And I love you, Meredith Granger. You are the best decision I ever made." As they stood together on the porch of the home they had built, their children's laughter floating from the yard where they played, Meredith reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought a wounded cowboy to her door all those years ago. What had begun as an act of compassion had blossomed into a love that sustained and nourished them both, healing wounds far deeper than those visible to the eye. "You ever wonder," she asked, leaning into Kingston's embrace, "what might have happened if you hadn't been shot that day? If you'd never come to Trinity?" Kingston's arms tightened around her. "Sometimes. But then I think that some things are meant to be, no matter the path that leads to them." He turned her gently to face him. "I believe I would have found you somehow, Meredith. Some connections are written in the stars long before we recognize them." As the sun set over the land they had nurtured together, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Meredith knew he was right. Their love story had begun with danger and healing, courage and compassion, but it continued with the quiet strength of shared dreams and the daily choice to love through all of life's challenges. The wounded cowboy and the woman who had saved him had found in each other not just healing, but a home for their hearts that would stand strong through all the seasons of their lives.